Good evening. This is Morrow's Photos, aka the Morrow's Edge. I know I'm bouncing around topics a little bit, but I enjoy talking about what I like. And one of the things we have is the President Trump coming in this week and doing a lot of executive orders. Some people, including myself, need a refresher from time to time and talk about how the Constitution applies to the United States. Now, a lot of people may not understand that not all of the Bill of Rights is applied to the states or to the federal government. And through a process, considered selective incorporation of the Bill of Rights, has gone through the years, and only through court cases have things been applied to the states and the federal government, saying that this applies to you in this manner, this applies to you in this manner. But that has to go through the process of working its way up through court cases throughout up to the Supreme Court. Excuse me. And so we see this a lot. I teach this in the basic government courses, to where I start them off on how our country came to be, and then we work our way through a curriculum. And around chapter 5 or 6, depending on the uh, text that I'm using in the curriculum, starts to talk about the incorporation of this Bill of Rights to the states. See, the U.S. Constitution was built at the federal for federal government, not to impede the people. So it was a contract, if you will. People having the power, federal government, you're not supposed to do, and then the things that are listed out, giving them, because they needed to have a strong government in order to move forward, but they didn't want a monarchy. They didn't want the oppression that was coming from the British monarchy. And so when they created the Constitution, they had to first, when they had the Continental Congress met, and they tried to have a loose league of friendship throughout the 13 colonies, but that didn't work. And so they ended up, when they wrote the Declaration of Independence and then did the first draft of our U.S. Constitution, they declared themselves separate and actually built them. Um, what do you call it? Became an independent country and tried to have their own U.S. or not U.S. but or their own constitution and laws to go by. I might edit myself here a little bit. The A lot of times when we talk about the incorporation uh, doctrine, we talk about how the Bill of Rights was made applicable to the states. Not until the 20th century did the Bill of Rights apply to the states. And we see this with the 14th Amendment, looking at the due process clause. One of the things that we see is forced incorporation through Gitlow versus New York in 1925. That was one of the Supreme Court cases that um, showed that Benjamin Gitlow, the executive secretary of the Socialist Party, had a due process that that the state had to follow in doing what happened to him. I don't know. Let me look over here before I get ahead of myself, because I don't remember exactly the whole 9 yards. Let's see. Gitlow versus New York, 1925, was a landmark Supreme Court case that significantly impacted the interpretation of the First Amendment rights concerning freedom of speech. It says that the case background, I'm not going to go into too much of it, but it says Gitlow was a member of the left wing section of the Socialist Party, which later became the Communist Party. He was arrested and convicted under the New York criminal anarchy law for publishing and distributing a manifesto called the Left Wing Manifesto that advocated for the overthrow of the government by force. Key points of the decision: the incorporation doctrine. The Supreme Court, in a 7-2 ruling, upheld that Gitlow's conviction However, the case is pivotal because it was one of the first cases where the Supreme Court applied the First Amendment to the states through the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment. This process is known as incorporation. So, looking at um, the incorporation doctrine, what we call it, of how the Bill of Rights through court cases was applied to the states. Gitlow was one of the first. Now, Gitlow was talking about freedom of speech, clear and present danger, um, but we need to look at other cases dealing with um, what's going on with the 14th Amendment. Now, we see that this selective incorporation says that through the process of getting the Bill of Rights to apply to the states, that most, but not all, guarantees in the Bill of Rights have been made applicable to the states. Fundamental freedoms, rights essential to order, liberty, and justice, subject to the highest standard of review. And we talk about that when we talk about the due process clause. And what else was it? The all that major um, judicial review with Marbury versus Madison in the beginning in the 1800s, where we had a court case that established where the Supreme Court is where the buck stopped when reviewing law and determining who judges what the law means and applying it to the uh, states and what the federal government couldn't do to the people. Let me look here. One of the things that I like talking about is the history of American government and looking at how all the different times that our country had turmoil and almost shattered, you know, similar to what it did during the Civil War. You have where the um, Madison versus Marbury. If you look at that, I believe it was 1865, but let me make sure. 1803. Whoops, I was way off. William Mayberry uh, was appointed as a justice of the peace by President John Adams, but his commission was not delivered before Adams left office. We know that uh, when Jefferson became president, he instructed Secretary of State James Madison to withhold Mayberry's commission. Mayberry sued Madison in the Supreme Court, asking for a writ of uh, mandamus to force Madison to deliver his commission. Chief Justice John Marshall wrote that the opinion for the court, which ruled that the writ could not be issued, the court found that the law authorizing the writ was unconstitutional. So when we look at that, the outcome of the case was established that the Supreme Court had judicial review, which gives the court the power to strike down laws that violate the Constitution. The Supreme Court became the primary interpreter of the Constitution, and the judiciary became a co-equal branch of government along with the executive branch and the legislative branch. We know, based on how the founding fathers built the Constitution of the United States, that they put the legislative branch first in Article 1, then you have the executive branch, Article 2, and then you have the Supreme Court, Article 3. And we know that that shows us the importance. We also know that shows the separation of powers. We also can take a look at how inside the legislative branch that the House of Representatives, the House of the People, was put first, and then the Senate. So we see the priority there of how the chain of command, if you will, was written there. So they have the House of the People, and then you had the senators, which before the 17th Amendment, I believe it is, that the senators were chosen by the states. So first you had the people would vote for the House of Representatives, the states would vote for the senators, and then they had the president voted on, and then vice president was picked in case something happened to the president. But through amendments, we took away the state's powers to vote for senators away, and when the people vote for senators, and then we vote for the House of Representatives and president. So, and vice president, can't forget that one, right? So it's kind of unique how that all falls into place. So we can look at the historical documents and see the separation of powers and the importance of powers of the way they're all lined out. Now, if I say something kind of messed up or something that's not clear, or if I stumble on my words, please let me know. I am not perfect. I've got things going on in my head. I'm thinking about what I want to say. I've got some content that I want to make sure I cover, and I try to be professional as well. And sometimes that doesn't, what appears here doesn't come out here correctly. So if I mess up, be polite and let me know. I'll fix it. And if I get something wrong, um, and you let me know, I'll address it and we'll fix it. Let's see. With Mulberry versus Madison, one of the things that's interesting is the person who didn't deliver the assignments for the justice of the peace for Adams, he ends up becoming a Supreme Court justice. He didn't do his job. But if he would have done his job, the guy that becomes the Supreme Court justice, if he would have done his job as Secretary of State, we wouldn't be in this mess. We'll get to that later. But it's funny how the person that didn't do their job got moved over in a position, okay? And because he didn't do his job, that case came about. And Thomas Jefferson and the Congress, when they won power back from Adams' group that was in control before Jefferson, Jefferson and the Anti-Federalists actually put the Supreme Court on vacation for I believe 15 or 16 months because they gave them they wrote the law putting them on vacation, and yeah, it almost tore our country apart. So it's very interesting on how these things came about. All right, so looking at the 14th Amendment, if I pull this document up that I made, so the text of the 14th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution says all persons born or naturalized in the United States, comma, and subject to the jurisdiction thereof, comma, are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. Period. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. So, President Trump is calling into question that all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. And they're calling into question the part that if you were not legally supposed to be in the United States, then you don't have that jurisdiction. If we go down and we take a look at the Supreme Court case that kind of put the 14th Amendment dealing with birthright, we have to look at United States versus Wong Kim Ark. Hope I pronounced it right. 1898. This case establishes the principle of the birthright citizenship in the U.S. All right. Wong Kim Ark, born in the U.S. to Chinese immigrants, was denied re-entry into the country after a trip to China under the Chinese Exclusion Act. The Supreme Court held that Wong Kim Ark was a U.S. citizen at birth under the Citizenship Clause of the 14th Amendment because he was born in the United States and was subject to its jurisdiction. It reaffirmed that all persons born in the United States, regardless of their parents' citizenship or immigration status are citizens. Now, if we drop down to the question that we're looking at here, it says that in the Wong Kim Ark was born in San Francisco, California in 1873 to Chinese parents who were not U.S. citizens and were legally um, I say it? Domiciled in the United States. His parents were subject to the Chinese Exclusion Act, which restricted Chinese immigrants and naturalization. Challenges. After visiting China, Wong Kim Ark was denied re-entry on the grounds that he was not a citizen of the United States. The officials at the port of San Francisco argued that despite being born in the United States, he wasn't a citizen because his parents were not citizens. The main legal question was whether someone born in the United States to non-citizen parents were automatically U.S. citizens under the 14th Amendment, which states that all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States. Now, the Supreme Court ruled 6-2. One judge was not participating, but the court ruled they held that Wong Kim Ark was indeed a U.S. citizen by birth, interpreting that the 14th Amendment Citizen Clause did include any clause to include anyone born in the U.S., with exception of children born to foreign diplomats or to members of an invading army. Key of the decision. Subject to the jurisdiction, the court clarified that subject to the jurisdiction thereof meant subject to the complete jurisdiction of the United States, not to partial or local jurisdiction. Wong Kim Ark was born here, and his parents, while not citizens, were domiciled in the United States under its jurisdiction, common law, and historical precedents. The opinion by the Justice Horace Gray reviewed English law, common law, which granted citizenship by birth within the realm. A historical U.S. practice supporting the citizenship by birthright was well established. The Chinese Exclusionary Act therefore rejected arguments that the Chinese Exclusionary Act should override the constitutionality guaranteed of citizenship, affirming that the amendment's language was intended to include anyone born in the U.S., regardless of the citizenship status of their parents. Now it says the impact. This case has been fundamentally an interpretation of the 14th Amendment Citizenship Clause, establishing the birth within the United States generally confers U.S. citizenship, a principle known as right of the soil. And this has not been challenged. It just says this, the aftermath, it says, was allowed back into the United States following the Supreme Court's decision. He lived out his life in the U.S., working as a waiter, then a cook, and he died in 43. Let's see. President Trump's executive order attempting to end birthright citizenship directly challenges the interpretation established by the Supreme Court in the case that we just stated in United States versus Wong Kim Ark. Trump, his executive order aims to reinterpret the 14th Amendment's Citizenship Clause to exclude children born to parents who are not U.S. citizens or lawful permanent residents from automatic citizenship. It specifically targets children of unauthorized immigrants and those with lawful but temporary status. The legal basis, the order asserts that the 14th Amendment has been interpreted to extend citizenship universally to everyone born within the United States. It redefines subject to the jurisdiction thereof to exclude those born to parents without legal status. Direct challenge, the executive order directly contradicts Wong Kim Ark's case. which held that anyone born in U.S. soil, regardless of their parent status, is a U.S. citizen under the Citizenship Clause of the 14th Amendment. Jurisdiction interpretation. Wong Kim Ark clearly defined subject to the jurisdiction to include all persons born in the U.S., whether very narrowly exceptions like children of foreign diplomats or enemy combatants. Trump's order attempts to broaden this exception to include children of undocumented immigrants. Now, legal and practical implications. We know that several states, you're going to have people, you're going to have groups are going to submit documentations, they're going to sue, and they're going to have to fight this out in the courts. We know that it's likely going to go all the way up to the Supreme Court, but it has to play out in the court systems until then. Even with the conservative leaning court, reversing such a long standing interpretation would be a significant departure from the already established law that's already been used throughout since ARC was figured out back in the early 1900s. Now, we know that with the flood of illegals coming in through our border and with the last administration allowing and bringing in all these illegals, that they were trying to, um, well, they were allowing an invasion of our country, and we'll get into that later. So it's a very interesting case. I like when you find out these things are uh, out there to where they're challenging a question, or they're challenging a one word or interpretation of one word or sentence or a paragraph or a comma. It's very interesting stuff. And so it's neat to see how some people might take President Trump at face value, but he's actually helping us incorporate more of the Bill of Rights to the states in the Constitution. Pretty cool stuff. So I hope all that made somewhat sense. If you want to check it all out, when you Google, you want to look at the 14th Amendment, you want to look at President Trump's executive order on birthrights, you want to look at the Supreme Court, the United States Supreme Court, SCOTUS. You want to look at their court cases on birthright and the 14th Amendment. And you want to make sure you're looking at apples and apples. So you're looking at the case dealing with the executive order, talking about the illegal immigrants, and you want to look at the court cases dealing with illegal immigrants and the kids who were born uh, in the United States with that jurisdiction. If you have any comments, questions, or concern, please contact me at Professor Sean Morrow at gmail.com, Professor Sean Morrow at gmail.com, or just leave a comment on YouTube and I'll try to answer it. I appreciate y'all and have a good day.